Hey everyone, Chat Cemetery is back. Today we're talking all about Cujo, the 1983 movie adaptation. There's a lot to say about it. Don't know how much of it will be good, but Marjani Rawls is joining me to discuss this. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. It's good to be back, talking about this movie right here because it's funny.
In some ways, definitely. Would
Yeah,
agree with you on that.
like in a bad way, and in a lot in bad ways, and a couple good ways. But I'm sure we'll talk about it. I'm sure we have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, just some quick details on it first, real quick here. The movie came out on August 12th, 1983. It had a budget of $8 million and made $21 million at the box office. It was only about an hour and a half long with a runtime of 93 minutes. So it was a success at the box office considering the time period. They almost tripled their money, which, that's perfectly fine. So even though it might not have been the best adaptation, so to speak, because of them changing the ending and everything, people clearly enjoyed the story enough to go check out this adaptation in theaters.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it was the greatest Stephen King adaptation. I mean, considering that at the time period. Wow. Actually, I'm looking at like the movies, like especially like horror movies that came out around then. Jaws 3D, Psycho 2, and Twilight Zone the movie. And I've seen all three of those. And Twilight Zone the movie is probably the best one because Jaws 3D is like really bad and Psycho 2 is not that much better. Uh, so if you put like Cujo up with like stuff like The Shining and stuff like that. It's not going to live up to that, obviously. But um, I don't know. Like the last act is probably the best, but the first, I would say, hour is like some like Days of Our Lives type stuff. I was watching it.
Yeah, it's very soap opera-y at first, and I do want to talk about the casting real quick here because you really only have four or five characters that you see a lot of in this movie. You have Dee Wallace starring as Donna Trenton. Her son Tad is played by Danny Pintaro, and her husband Vic is Daniel Hugh Kelly. And then you have Steve Kemp, who is played by Christopher Stone. And of those names, I really only recognize Dee Wallace. I think she happened to have been in something recently, and I was like, you know what? She looks kind of familiar. So then I went through her IMDb page, and I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. She's been in quite a bit.
Yeah, she's in E.T.
Yes, that too. Much bigger movie and better movie than this one, I would say.
And I think like the kid Tad was like in on Who's the Boss? So like with Tony Danza, he was in that. I wouldn't say it's Cujo's Who's Who, but like they were well known for the time.
Yeah, it's certainly a movie that tells you who some of the up and coming stars were or stars already of that era were. And you're not getting huge names in this. And with a budget of $8 million, that's completely understandable because there are some actors who would get that entire budget for themselves, even at this point in time, probably, or close to it. So I think the casting was fine. It was more the writing that I didn't enjoy quite as much because, like we already said, it kind of had a very Days of Our Lives soap opera feel to it. And because of the affair and how that is written for the movie, it feels a little more tame in the movie than it does in the book because it's way more vulgar and descriptive in the book than it is in this. And I think part of that is just because there are certain things that they wanted to make appeal to more of a mass audience, I would say. And if you kind of put more of the affair in there, maybe, you aren't going to get as many teenagers or kids wanting to see this, even though it is rated R. There's no doubt that this is still a brutal movie by the end of it, but it isn't nearly as brutal as the book. And I think that was kind of one of the downsides to it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I felt like it was like a tale of two movies because like the first half, like you saw Cujo and like he gets rabies and by like that bat and whatnot, and it was very like. Did you ever when you watched like the first part? Did you feel like it was like very Disney? It's like, oh, Cujo's like chasing a rabbit and blah blah blah. That, oh, how nice! And then like he gets bit, and then it goes to the family, and Vic and Donna are having problems, especially with like their car, that damn car, and then it's like Donna's having like that affair with the ex boyfriend, and it takes up like the first and second halves of the movie, and I'm like, okay, this movie is named Cujo, so all right, like by the time we start seeing Cujo like killing people, you're already like, okay, we're in like some like melodrama where like, oh well, the cereal company's going under, and like I don't know what to do, and my marriage is failing, so I'm gonna go. And it was just like, okay, like it was funny to that point, and then like when Cujo finally shows up, because like you see in the movie, like he starts to like get rabies more and more and whatnot. Like it's like, oh, okay, the movie's about a dog, so there you go.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where when I was watching this, it was a very slow start for me. I was like, okay, all right. I already know what's going to happen because I did read the book first. So when you know what happens in the book, it's one of those things where you're like, okay, let's see how well they adapted this at that point.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, it's not a horrible movie. It's one of those things where it's a fine movie if these are the kinds of movies you like, and taking into consideration that this was in the 80s, I wasn't expecting Cujo to necessarily be the adaptation that was this sort of big masterpiece like you could probably say about ones like The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile. Those are some of the movies where critics love them, fans love them, and they're still good to this day. This, not so much. And there is one thing I want to point out, as we kind of start talking about the plot a little more here. And it's just the fact that not only was the affair portrayed differently, but we might as well go ahead and talk about, once they actually get to the climax of the movie and you have both Tad and Donna stuck in their broken down car. The dog already has rabies by this point, and the dog just keeps coming and coming and coming. And, I don't think we see a lot of the same stuff within the car that we get described to us in the book. And I think that was kind of a downside because you have this very, very long moment. And I think they do a nice job of splitting it up by kind of going back and showing Vic and, going back to the cops. And so you're not just watching these two people in a car for, like 20 minutes straight. That would have been pretty boring, I would say. So I do like that they did kind of split that up. But one of the other things I noticed is that we also didn't get a lot of scenes with the Cambers. Charity and Brett go, and it's a big deal in the book. They go see Charity's sister, and you get a good look at the sister's life and what they're doing there. Whereas in the movie, you see them leave, and then I believe that's it. I don't even know if you really see any of their time spent with Charity's sister.
Yeah, you don't really see them come back or whatnot.
So to me, that was very strange because they could have used some of those moments to break up, Donna trying to wait out Cujo. And they just didn't do it. And I was like, but this felt like such a big part of the book to understand the Cambers even more. And I feel like that family was sort of just pushed aside so that they could focus on the affair and on the Trenton family instead. And I don't know if it was quite as effective as they were hoping.
Yeah, I feel like Joe was really just there to like just fix the Pinto that never really got fixed.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, like I was thinking about it and I'm like, okay, like I've replaced my alternator before. I don't think the car would start. because like the alternator charges everything in your car. So I'm like, how the hell did she was if the alternator was failing, how the hell did she start the car and was able to move the car before the alternator like goes? Then again, like it's a Ford Pinto back then. It could have worked different. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen King did have his own Pinto that he bought shortly after getting his first advance from Carrie, I believe. So, he definitely knows the car if he had one. I don't know how well he would have known the car because, I have a car and I'm just like, I need oil. I need gas. Great.
Like I know that it's hard to like adapt these books like accurately, kind of.
Yeah.
And like you said, like in the film, you get basically like Donna and Tad in the car in instances, and you see like it getting really bad because they're starting to get dehydrated and like they can't get out the car. And like there's an instance where the phone rings, like in Camber's house, and Cujo goes for it, and then the phone rings again, and Cujo just stays. So I'm like, oh
Yeah.
wow, okay.
Speaking of Cujo going after, the phone, it was funny because I noticed this and I had to go back and watch it again. But when Cujo breaks the window to start barking at the phone, you can see someone's hand go up and like grab Cujo's collar and bring the dog back down. And I just thought that was so funny that that actually made it into the final cut. And obviously Saint Bernards are huge dogs, so you definitely have to have handlers for them. And it says here that Cujo was played by 4 Saint Bernards, several mechanical dogs, and a Labrador Great Dane mix in a Saint Bernard costume. Which the last one just sounds ridiculous. Putting a dog in a different dog costume to have it be in a movie when you already had 4 other Saint Bernards and mechanical dogs. And you could definitely tell at times when they weren't using a real dog just because of, how brutal some of the scenes were with the dogs, even though they were kind of hidden off camera a little, especially when Cujo goes after Camber and the other guy in the neighbor's house. The neighbor's name is eluding me right now, but you see him attack his own owner, Joe, and it's just sort of this brutal scene, but you can kind of tell it's not a real dog. So that was probably one of the mechanical dogs, obviously, one of the several that they had. That seems like a lot of dogs for this movie.
I think it was Gary. I think his name was Gary. Thank you for bringing that up because I remember like in Jaws 3, there was a scene where Jaws was going after the boat and they like insert like lion noises
Yeah.
and like you could hear it roaring coming out of the water. And there was instances in Cujo where you could definitely tell it was a mechanical dog. And I'm like, all right, like I know this is the '80s and whatnot, but like your continuity person should like try to dress that up a little bit better.
Yeah.
Uh,
But the hand pulling the dog down was just too funny. I was like, wow, that really made it into the final cut.
yeah, they're just like, all right, man, like we got to get this movie. We got to make the August 12th release date. We got to get this movie out. Yeah. uh, I mean, the last 30 minutes, it is kind of suspenseful to me. Like, it reminds me of, like, kind of like the survival horror movies where, like, it's just, like, one character and they're, like, waiting out, like, a killer and whatnot. And, like, you have, like, the mom and the son, and the son is damn near death because it's hot and haven't drank anything and whatnot. And there's definitely a change from the book with that as well, if you want to talk about it. Because Tad doesn't fare too well on the book, let's just say.
Not at all. And obviously, the movie has a very different ending. So why don't we go ahead and jump into the ending here? Because I think, in a sense, it's kind of the most important change that they make because it literally changes these people's lives in a completely different way. So you have Donna and Tad ending up in the Cambers home. and Donna ends up shooting Cujo, which is ultimately what saves them. And then, Vic and the ambulance and everything, they get there just in time. So Tad is saved, whereas in the book, he, like you said, has a much different fate. He does not make it out alive in the book. And that sort of, leads to this tension between Donna and Vic that we don't really get in here, because not only did Donna cheat on Vic, but then with Tad dying in the book, that sort of just piles on and makes things so tense. But here it's kind of like all is forgiven by the end of the movie or something. And I'm just like, I don't think I agree with this, but it's a choice and they made it.
It's a safe ending. It's a real safe ending, of course, because like the broken bat, and then like Cujo gets like impaled in the stomach, and like everybody's like saved, and then like uh Vic and Donna are okay, and then Thad is okay, and like you know what I mean. Like it's not like Carrie was. Carrie, like you know what I mean, like Carrie dies. You know what I mean? There's no happy ending. She dies. Her mom dies. Pretty much the whole damn school dies, and then like the girl survives, but she has PTSD from it all the time. So it's not really like a happy ending. Cujo, they went full like this rabid dog brought us back together. You know what I mean? Like it's very different from the book, and I feel like if you are going to rated R anyway, you might as well keep the ending.
Yeah, that was definitely an odd choice given the fact that it was a rated R movie. It's not like it was PG-13 and they were trying to tone everything down for that. I don't even know if PG-13 was a thing in the 80s. I feel like, there were fewer rating options back then, so it's like something was probably PG or rated R, and that was kind of it. There was no in between there for them. I'd have to look into that and see when PG-13 became like an official rating, but I know for a while they didn't have it. So maybe that's why they still had to go with the R rating, but didn't want to do the same exact thing that the book had in it, just because of how brutal it is. And, killing a kid even in a book is a pretty tough thing to do.
Yeah. Then again, it is like a Stephen King movie, you know what I mean, or a Stephen King book. But I mean, I get for aesthetic purposes why they didn't kill him. They're like, I don't know if we should do this, but yeah, like I just felt like with the rating, I mean, like go for it. You know what I mean? Like we'll mourn the kid, like you know what I mean, like, but like it just kind of you built this whole movie up with the tension between Donna and Vic with the affair and whatnot. And it was just kind of like Vic was like, all right, I'm going to go away and I'm going to decide what I'm going to do. I don't know yet, but I'm going to decide it. And then, he got back home. Of course, he wants to rekindle the marriage, even though he just got cheated on. And then, like, sees everybody's missing and, like, thought it was Kemp. And I'm like, all right, cool. But then he finds the Cujo thing, and it's like, all right, all's forgiven. I'm like, what? Like, she's like been cheating on you. Like, all right. I mean, I guess having that like thing where like, oh wow, like I almost lost my family. You're like, all right, they mean more to me than the adultery. But come on, dude.
It's kind of hard to like this movie as much as I like the book. And I wouldn't even say the book is one of my favorite Stephen King ones necessarily, and it was one of the novels he wrote when he was doing all sorts of cocaine. So I think you can definitely feel that in the book too, and that was discussed in the episode I did on the book. But with the movie, it does feel like they just tried to tone things down a notch or 10, and because of it, I wouldn't say the movie completely suffers, because there are some highlights of it, and I think the casting was one of those things. I do think that the actors they were able to get for this movie played their roles that they were given pretty well. And you know Tad was a little annoying in the car, because he was missing his dad, and it was kind of like they just wanted to push the idea that he kind of didn't think his mom was going to be able to handle anything, and he just kept wanting his dad because apparently his dad was going to come back and fix everything right away. And that was kind of a damper on that whole scene there because, Dee Wallace is a great actress, and then you just kind of confine her to this space where she's trying to protect her kid, but her kid just wants to go home and doesn't really care.
Yeah, I think they kind of set that up when Tad and Vic are like talking, and like he's like talking about the monsters, and he's like, "Hey, I'll write the monster code down, and then like you can
Yeah.
say it, or mom will say it, and whatnot." And they kind of make like I know Donna like had the affair, right? But they
Yeah.
kind of make Donna like helpless. Like they're kind of like, well, since you did the affair, like um her like redemption arc was to like find out this dog somehow. And I think there's like a scene in the car where like Tat is like talking to her, and she's like, I think the battery is weak. He's like, well, why would the battery be weak? I mean, like, I know it's a kid, but like as a mom, like how do you respond to that? Like she didn't know. Like she even goes crazy. She's like, why didn't you fix this damn car? Because the car keeps on giving problems. Like as like they're driving, like earlier in the film, the car's all jerky and
Right.
whatnot. But yeah, I think that like the way they got to Donna, like quote unquote redeeming herself, I agree with you, is kind of annoying, especially like through the kid.
In the book, she never even gets the chance to redeem herself, really. She ends up with rabies, and they go into that a little more in the book, too, because with this ending, she's scratched up, she has bite marks, and then they just end it. And it's like, but what about her having rabies? That didn't happen.
Like, oh, she's fine. Oh, all right,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
She just got bit by a dog that has rabies, so she wouldn't have it. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, I was kind of mad at the ending when I watched it, but I calmed down a little bit after thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, okay, I see why they did that, and they didn't really do the sort of epilogue that Stephen King likes to do at the end of his books and everything, which is when we see Donna recovering from having rabies and everything like that. But, you know, this could have been worse at the same time. And one of the other things I want to point out about the affair is the fact that Vic found out about it by driving by and seeing Donna with Steve. And he was kind of, grabbing her, and they were clearly having an argument when she went to go end things with him. And that's not how that happens in the book either. And I was like, really? He just happens to drive by and see this?
Yeah, and like he walks in and like doesn't like she like spill milk or something like that while he's standing there, like all three of them.
She does that when Steve walks in.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then I think Tad comes down because he was taking a nap or something. And then Vic happens to come home at the same time too.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is going on?
And then like Vic does nothing. Vic does like I would go crazy. What the hell are you doing in my house? Like, is this the dude? Like, oh my god! Like I would go. Vic just like stands there, and like Steve stands there and looks right back at him, and like Donna just goes and cleans up the milk, and I'm like, what? Like, what kind of soap opera like Vic doesn't throw a punch? Like, I'm surprised. I'm shocked.
Especially considering how upset he is about it too. He can hardly work. He can't really focus on anything. And then when Donna's not answering, he waits like what, 2 nights or something, 2 days
Yeah.
or something before going back. And maybe in the back of his mind he thinks she didn't really end the affair, but she already said that she did, from what I recall. They have a conversation about it before he leaves, and you would think that someone would know where she is. And the fact that she's not answering, no one's answering at the Camber household, it takes him a while to sort of get in gear and come back. And, I guess it doesn't matter in the end because he's still able to get to the house in time and, save them. So it's definitely a different dynamic in this because of how he finds out. And I do agree with you. It's like, okay, really, you aren't going to say anything at all. And I get that Steve is kind of an imposing guy compared to Vic, who is just this ad guy. So yeah, it was definitely interesting. I felt like it didn't have the same emotional gut punch that it could have with the affair, and yeah, that whole thing was just like too soap opera-y, which that's not great.
Especially when he leaves, like when he's starting to leave, and like she runs, Donna runs after the car, like wait, wait, like it's over between me and him, like it's over, and then he's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, and then just it just drives off. I'm like, oh my god, great, like it's we got some like Days of Our Lives stuff here.
Yeah, exactly. Before we start to wrap things up, though, I do want to talk more about Cujo specifically because it's interesting how they set that up. We get that opening scene with Cujo chasing after the rabbit and everything, whereas in the book, that doesn't happen until way later, from what I remember. I don't think we saw Cujo until almost a third of the way through the book. So you spend all this time with these characters and you only get a glimpse of Cujo before really diving into that story. Whereas here, the movie kept coming back to Cujo a little more. And I get why it did that because the movie is called Cujo. And that was one of the downsides to the book for me. It was like it took us so long to get to the actual Cujo story. But here, they sort of try to remedy that. And I think that is something that they did better with the movie. They're like, okay, we're going to introduce you to Cujo right off the bat so you know what this dog looks like and just how massive it is.
Yeah, that was one of the saving graces for me in the movie is that like like he's the Cambers dog, and then like you see him with Billy, and like he's all playful and stuff like that, and then Donna notices that like he has like a little bite on his nose, and then you see as you revisit it in the movie him starting to devolve because he has rabies. Like he's starting to like get a little ragged, starting to get a little erratic. He's starting to foam at the mouth. Like you get to see that, and like that was pretty cool. Like in a horror movie, like I wanna like see like some like suspense, some build up, and you get to see that, and you get to see how big he is. So like when he kills people, like you understand, you know what I mean? Like it's a huge dog, and like those are powerful dogs. So when he like when he starts to go like go on his rampage, like you get it, you know.
Because of the dog's massive size, too, it's just so hard to take a dog like that down. And you hate seeing it at the same time, even though Cujo, is infected with rabies and is completely losing his mind. You still feel bad for Cujo in the end. Like, I felt way worse for Cujo than I did for any of the characters. Maybe Tad comes in second.
Yeah, Gary's an idiot because like Gary gets attacked, and then he's like, "Come on!" Like I'm like, "Get in the house!"
Yeah.
Like barricade the door. Like he closes the screen door. Like Cujo won't go through it, and then Joe sees Cujo. He's like, "Oh my god, you have rabies!" like, "Oh my god, he's rabies." So yeah, like I do feel bad for Cujo because like he's all like this gentle dog and whatnot, and then like you like, oh wow, like rabies really like makes him start to like kill people, and it's not really his fault. Like he was just chasing a rabbit, and when he dies, you're like, ah, damn it, you know what I mean?
Especially because it takes so long for it to happen and it's so brutal. First, he's impaled, and then she has to shoot him to finish him off. And it's just like, oh, poor dog. You don't want to see that happen to any dog, even if the dog is mean, or has rabies.
Yeah, it's very like Michael Myers ish. Like they'll like shoot Michael Myers, he'll come back.
Yeah.
They'll stab Michael Myers, he'll just walk it off. Like it's just like, oh damn, dude, like he got impaled in the stomach, but like he's fine. Like he shook it off until he got shot. And I'm like, oh damn it, a dog just got shot and killed. Like damn it, you know what I mean? Like anytime like a pet dies in a movie, like it's always a gut punch.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else you want to discuss about Cujo?
No, I mean if you have like an hour and 30 to kill, I mean watch it, like especially with us because we've like watched, and especially for this podcast and because we're Stephen King fans, like we've watched every single one of these or going to. But I mean it's definitely not the best. Like it's, you know what I mean? I know it's like a cult classic,
Yeah.
especially because like,
It's not the
you know, the
worst
last one.
either. It's
Yeah,
pretty
it's definitely
effective
not the
as a
worst.
horror movie. And even though you can tell at times that it's a movie from 1983, I think that's okay because a lot of the cult horror movies, at least from what I've seen, they're not fantastically made movies.
No.
You know, they are cult movies because it's one of those things you just want to sit down, eat some snacks, and
Yeah.
just have a good time and not think too terribly critically of them. And I think that's perfectly fine. You know, like I said, I am keeping in mind what time period these works have come out during. So things are definitely going to progress. Obviously, when we get to the more current stuff, CGI is a million times better and used a lot more often. And even practical effects look better today just because you have better mechanics for things. And it's one of those things where I don't mind watching these older movies and seeing how they've aged because that's part of the fun of it.
Yeah, like if you watch something like Salem's Lot, there's like a TV series, and like you see like the scenes where like the vampires like fly into the room with like a smoke machine and stuff like that. Like it's actually kind of fun. Like you said, like CGI has like progressed so much. Especially because I'm a big horror fan. Like looking back at the '80s movies and like especially like practical stuff, like John Carpenter, The Thing, and whatnot. Like those are still pretty dope. Like they did that with like practical effects and. Like you said, like as we talk more about like the movies and whatnot, like they'll kind of get better.
Absolutely. I know we kept this one a little short, but I think I'll make up for it in some of these other upcoming episodes just because, you know, an hour and a half movie, sometimes there's not a ton to say, especially with one that kind of started as slow as this one did. You know that you have to get to the point where Cujo starts attacking people. So it really just felt like a waiting game until that point, and you were like, all right, here we go. Here's what I wanted to see. And I wouldn't say, again, that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just how the story was written as well. You have to wait for that payoff. And while I think the book pays off better than the movie, it's just, you know, personal preference. If you are perfectly fine that a child did not die, you know, that's okay. I mean, you know, that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but you know, sometimes tragedy is what makes some of Stephen King's stories so great.
Yeah, I felt like watching this movie, there were like parallel storylines. Like you had the Wallace storyline, which was very like drama and soap opera, but then you had like Cujo, which like he has rabies and he's gonna go on a rampage, and you know they eventually intercede, and you know, like I said, like the third act, like it was cool because like everything was confined to a space, and then there was that suspense, and then there was like, are they going to get out? Like, what's going to kill them first, the elements or Cujo?
Right.
So that was actually pretty cool. But like you said, like it did, like especially like the first 45 minutes, it was kind of like a dirge to get to. You know what I mean? Like it was.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay, like you know what I mean? Like, oh well, an affair, blah blah blah, like monsters in the closet, all right, like we're building up to something and it takes a little bit.
One last thing to note is how horrible the cops are in this. You know, one of the cops shows up to try and get to Donna and Tad and just gets annihilated by Cujo. And then, you know, you have George Bannerman, who is the sheriff of Castle Rock at the time, I believe. And he's a character who pops up in multiple stories, but here it's sort of like, okay, he's the sheriff. they're going to do this, and they didn't do a whole lot. In the end, it was Vic who got there first and was able to save them. Well, not first. Technically, he got there second, but he was the one who was able to, get their job done for them, basically.
George couldn't draw his gun before Cujo killed him. Like, I was like, all right.
Was George the one who went? I think they sent just some random cop. Mason, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Like, you couldn't get your gun out? Like I know, like,
And then
Cujo
he
has
drops
rabies.
it. It's
Yeah,
just a
like,
mess.
it's like every, like, horror motif where, like, somebody walks into a dark room. Like, why would you do that? Or, like,
Yeah.
you're like, I'm overcome with like fear that like I drop the weapon that I have that will like I know Cujo has rabies, but like he's a big dog. It's gonna take him a little bit to get there before you get the gun out, and he just gets killed. I'm like, all right, great.
Exactly. Well, I think that is the note we are going to wrap this up on. But Rajani, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Cujo. I know it's not it's probably not anyone's favorite Stephen King adaptation. If it is, I apologize. You know, to each their own. But I know you and I have others down the line that we plan to talk about that will either be worse or a lot better. It depends on what day it is.
Yeah, I will look forward to coming back to those.
You guys can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Chat Cemetery. And as always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, see ya.